Tack så mycket. Hello and most welcome to 1884. And we will today continue with Kelhoffer's The Offer of Authentication by Withstanding the Coming Great Tribulation in the Revelation of John. Last look, we thought severely or clearly about how differently we today look at John, and we look at him in the left hemisphere perspective with either or, and we do not use complementarity. And this exclusive tendency makes it impossible to reach the same understanding that John offers. So our take from the beginning makes everything different. And although we say the same thing or read the same thing, it will be read in another manner altogether. And this is especially clear in this particular case, where the either or situation is taking hold of Kelhoffer and Orn, for instance, and this imagined timeline and imagined spatial circumstances come to dominate what we understand about reality. And this is especially clear, I think, in what you went through earlier in the Phagon Ido Laphita, and how that today cannot be understood even if we bring in ambiguity, because the left hemisphere does not understand ambiguity as in the sense the right hemisphere. So to infer different readings will not further the cause. In the beginning of page 153, he gives different options. And the optionality is also typical of the left hemisphere as well. So oddly enough, you'll be damned if you do, and you'll be damned if you don't. And we will continue the reading where we left off. That's the fourth paragraph on page 153. John's allegation that, metaphorically speaking, some Christians are eating idol meat is complemented by the additional claim that Balaam and Jezebel support immorality. Pornevelse. The assumed connection of immorality with idol meat is attested in both Revelation 2:14d and 20d, and Acts 15. In the latter writing, rather than the verb porneo, the cognate noun porneia occurs. To apos apegesethe ton aliskimaton ton eidolon ke tis porneas. In addition, both Revelation 2 and Acts 15 feign reluctance to offer any additional burden to their proscriptions. Acts 15:28b. Inden pleon epitefesva imin varos plin touton ton epanages o balo imas alo varos. My purpose is not to claim that there is a direct literary relationship between Revelation 2 and Acts 15. Rather, I wish to argue that, taken together, the similarities of Revelation 2:14 and 20 to the likely pre-Lucan material in Acts 15 support the inference that the author of Revelation frames his critique and instructions in such a way that they will appear to stand on the basis of earlier established Christian tradition. Echo.
Tradition. Established Christian tradition.
Great. Accordingly, John's association of participation in polytheistic practices, such as the imperial cult, with these two traditional taboos, renders as illegitimate the practices that he claims are condoned by other Christian prophets.
Condoned.
Prophets! I further argue that John's appeal to tradition attempts to bridge the gap between the traditional prescriptions against idol meat and immorality on the one hand, and the newer problem of the imperial cult on the other hand. This argument becomes stronger when one considers the adulterous connotations of pornevse in Revelation 2:14d and 20d. Although Owen correctly notes that, in citation, a close association is assumed by Judaism to exist between idolatry and sexual immorality.
Immorality.
in the case of Revelation 2:14d and 20d, one should not limit the semantic range of the verb porneo and its cognate porneia to misconduct that is specifically sexual. In addition to sexual offenses, the terms porneo and porneia can also denote other forms of moral corruption, including idolatry. The latter is precisely the meaning of porneia and porneo that John consistently uses in 4 subsequent passages. And the kings on the earth, of the earth, who fornicated porneo and lived in luxury with her, will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. Aha, well, that is supposed to be read. I didn't get that, sorry. We can go back from. The rest of humankind did not repent their murders or their sorceries, of their immorality, porneia, or their thefts. Come, I will show you the judgment of the great whore who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of earth have fornicated, porneo, and with the wine of whose immorality, porneia, the inhabitants of the earth have become drunk.
Drunk.
For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her immorality, porneia, and the kings of the earth have fornicated, porneo, with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxury. And the kings of the earth who fornicated, porneo, and lived in luxury with her, will weep and wail over her when they see smoke of her burning.
Weep.
Burning, I need to put a pause there. In Roman Asia Minor, such prescriptions against idolatry would naturally include the imperial cult. Accordingly, although a sexual interpretation for Nesa is possible at 214d and 220d, the notion that John is concerned here primarily, if at all, about sexual misconduct is a lot less secure if one acknowledges that the accusations of eating idol meat and practicing immorality address the imperial cult circuitously, kitsely. Moreover, when one considers the potentially adulterous connotation of idol meat,
Nami, nami, nami. Meat.
the inference that with Pornevse, John accuses his rival prophets of participating in idolatry and commending other Christians to do the same is compelling. In short, in regard to the accusations Hagen, Idolophita, and Pornevse against Balaam and Jezebel, I wish to credit John with crafting polemic double entendres. By appealing to traditional prescriptions, John can summon to his assistance the taboos of idol meat and immorality as embodied in the polytheistic idolatry, including the imperial cult. Imperial cult. Cult. Sect. The hypothesis I bring to this problem is that rather than addressing directly the exact issue of partial assimilation to the imperial cult, on which John differs with his Christian opponents, he assumes the rhetorical upper hand by way of a two-pronged analogy, according to which tradition should declare that his position of radical non-assimilation is the only acceptable option. With regard to such partial assimilation, the distinction Hans Josef Clark draws between a hard or strict and a soft and limited participation in the imperial cult by some Christians is particularly instructive. Als viel gefährlicher betrachtet der Apokalyptiker den weichen Kaiserkult. Wenn jemand zum Beispiel in einer Festmenge lediglich Mitglied oder an einem geselligen Vereinsmahl mit religiösen Obertönen teilnahm. Weil er sich dem aus den beruflichen Rücksichten nicht gut verschließen zu können glaubte und die Bekenntnisfrage davon überhaupt nicht tangiert sah.
Ich danke so.
Sah. Der Apokalyptiker bleibt in diesem Punkt hart.
Hart. In diesem Punkt hart.
Jeder Kompromiss widerspricht seiner Zielvorstellung, die von der Durchsetzung der Herrschaft Gottes auch auf Erden und vom Ideal der Reinheit der endzeitlichen Heilsgemeinde bestimmt wird. Wird. Of course, in an inter-Christian conflict over disputed authority, and conflicting teachings, it is much easier to assert oneself by condemning one's opponents for idolatry than by dissecting the particularities of relative cultural assimilation. According to the author of Revelation, when one becomes defiled by making an offering to the emperor, one cannot expect to receive the hidden manna that Christ will give to the one who conquers. Accordingly, John warns the faithful that an avenging Jesus will bring severe judgment, possibly even death, to each of you, according to your works. To summarize, the revelation of John attests to a controversy between one early Christian prophet, John, and one or more groups of early Christian leaders, including prophets, with whom John competed for influence in several of the 7 churches he addresses in Revelation 2-3. The general question of assimilation to the surrounding polytheistic culture becomes concretely embodied in the challenge of the imperial cult. John cites as precedent against participation in the traditional Christian prescriptions against meat sacrificed to idols, idolotheta, and immorality, porneo, both of which carry connections to idolatry. What remains for this chapter to consider are the particular ways that John refers to suffering and persecution to bolster the authority of his message against what may have been a majority of Christians who embraced other viewpoints, as well as to exhort the faithful to embrace his viewpoint. John's anticipation of the coming tribulation and of judgment against Rome plays a significant role in what he seeks to accomplish in this regard. Regard, regard for John, assimilation makes absolutely no sense when God's judgment will soon fall upon not only pagan Rome, but also Christians who participate in her idolatrous ways. Five, Antipas' stature as witness and faithful one epitomizes uncompromising resistance. Resistance. The previous subsection highlighted John's great consternation that certain Christian leaders were allowing or even encouraging others believers' partial or soft participation in the imperial cult. John criticizes any such participation in a roundabout way, summoning traditional taboos against idol meat and immorality, with their connotations of idolatrous conduct as evidence that the faithful must abstain.
Oh no.
An additional challenge that John acknowledges is the killing in Pergamon of a Christian named Antipas.
Killing.
Yeah, weird, horrible. What traumatic story. Oh. Our analysis of John's message to the church in Pergamon brings into focus several things about how John assigns value to Antipas' suffering and death.
Bleh. Bleh. Yes. Bleh. Poor Antipas.
In particular, on the basis of that suffering and death, John accords to Antipas a stature of Jesus as witness and faithful one. As witness and faithful one. It'll be argued that at Revelation 2:13, Martis is not to be understood as the status of an elite marcher.
Elite martyr.
Elite marcher.
Martus means also witness, simply.
Rather, John holds Antipas up as a cherished example of the steadfast resistance required of all Christians. All Christians. For John, there is no middle ground. On the one hand, he commends his and Antipas's non-assimilation. And on the other hand, he condemns the enticement of compromise that will be met by decisive judgment from Jesus.
Jesus.
Who has the sharp two-edged sword.
Ouch. Two-edged sword. Ush. 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 Oj.
The analysis begins with Revelation 2:13, which describes Antipas's killing. The following subsection contextualizes this description within John's prophetic oracle to the church of Pergamum. And the oracles command that all Christians be prepared to resist as Antipas did. One thing that immediately becomes apparent is that John's conviction about impending persecution, as expressed elsewhere in Revelation, is not entirely contrived, but stems, at least in part, from the death of this Christian. I know where you are living, where Satan's throne, opo o thronos to Satana.
Oj, oj, oj.
Yet you are holding fast to my name,
Nej.
and you did not deny your faith in me, even in the days of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one, who was killed before you, where Satan lives.
Oj, oj, oj.
Ouch, ouch, or my God, my God.
My God, my God. Satan.
The references to the throne of Satan and to Pergamon as where Satan lives likely implicate oppression from the imperial cult as the cause for Antipas's death. Moreover, Owen plausibly takes Apek Tanfi Par mean to indicate that Antipas had been executed publicly. Owen's interpretation requires constructing the preposition para with a dative as indicating not Antipas relationship or special proximity to the congregation in Pergamon, but with the aorist passive apectanfi as denoting his execution in the sight.
Oj, oj, oj.
Oh dear, oh dear. Following Owen's interpretation, the translation above departs from the NRSV. Who was killed among you, rendering os apictan par imin, as who was killed before you. Excuse me that. For the author of Revelation, Antipas's resistance offers the paradigmatic antithesis to the false Christian prophets of Balaam and the Nicolaitans mentioned in the next verses 2:14 to 2:15, as well as Jezebel. Whereas the Balaamites engender corruption from idol meat, immorality, and idolatry. Antipas died because of his resistance and now receives honor as Jesus's witness and faithful one. O Marcos move, or pistos move. Such laudatory appellation is remarkable, since John's very first characterization of Jesus in Revelation 1:5a is as the witness, the faithful one. What this communicates is the tremendously high value that John assigns to Antipas's suffering. On the designation of Antipas as martis, Alison I. Trites argues that in Revelation the term does not connote martyrdom, but that the idea of witness in Apocalypse is to be understood in terms of Christians actually bearing witness before Roman courts of law.
Oj. Not connote martyrdom.
One need not assume or demonstrate that Christians were in fact brought before a Roman court to accept Wright's points that Revelation hails Antipas as a witness who, in John's perspective, died because of his testimony, and that John does not use martis for him in the sense of martyr. Yet if, as is argued above, one is persuaded that Antipas died because of his resistance to the imperial cult. Such a Roman judicial context for Antipas's witness cannot be excluded, especially if a public execution had followed some sort of ritual. Some sort of trial, sorry. What is important for the present study is that Antipas's statue as Jesus' witness and faithful follower stems from his resistance, his suffering, and in this extraordinary instance, his death. And although it is a bit macabre, we will pause at death here.
Yes, death. Us end at death. Page. 158. Page 158. Page 158 at death. PDF, page 16.
158.
Indeed, 158.
Ska vi se här. Vi tar några citat. Some quotes. Let's take some quotes. I think page 156, if you make the general question, and this is in the second paragraph, 4 lines down. The general question of assimilation to the surrounding polytheistic culture becomes concretely embodied in the challenge of the imperial cult, utterly opposing any involvement in the degenerate practice of the imperial cult. John cites a precedent against participation. The traditional Christian prescriptions against meat sacrifice to the idols and immorality, both of which carry connotations of idolatry. See if we can expand this and include quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics show that our rationale, when we say we find contradictions, is wrong. Quantum mechanics have their own, that wouldn't be called contradictions. I think a more mathematically apt word would be paradoxes. But we know if we read this text from a Western modern perspective, our logic and reasoning of what is coherent and consistent is severely different from, for instance, what would be thought of in India or China or Japan. It's never the same what is perceived as contradiction in English culture and Indian culture. And we know it also has changed over time. And now, when we become more and more left hemispheric, I think we can see so many signs of this in the text. It's just amazing. But the Bible should not, in the way the Kelhoffer, go together and make one singular meaning. That would be horrible. I think that would be as immoral as it can be, because that would be imposing a reading of 2020 or 2015. And that specific subjective way of seeing it, private language derived, that in reality has nothing to do with what the scripture says. That is a typical left hemisphere take. India, there is no problem in understanding quantum mechanics. What we perceive to be a contradiction 2023 are there truer contradictions that take in the opposing pairs. There need to be opposing pairs for anything to be understood. And to have purity, you take in what's around you. The right hemisphere, which is closer to science, knows that. The left is lacking morality, as Ian McGilchrist says. I can recommend The Master and His Emissary. The clearest trait of the left hemisphere is the lack of morale. Instead, the left hemisphere uses subjective, what he calls contradictions, which are never coherent, not even in that person. Now we have, to amplify that, the private language argument, the PLA. John needs to go completely against the other apostles. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Because go against is an invention of 2022 or 2019. It's an emotionalized subjectivization. It's not even private religion, because it's a sort of nonsense. Let me further that thinking and go to, let's see here. I particularly like this on page 157. For John, there is no, this is 3 lines down, there is no middle ground. On the one hand, he commands his and Antipas's non-assimilation. And on the other hand, he condemns the enticement of compromise that will be met by the decisive judgment from Jesus, who has the sharp two-edged sword. That's a good reason to have a compassionate, and for his compassion to be pure. But many readers of today's Bible, theologians and atheists together, exempelvis Dawkins said that the God of the Bible is a naughty and evil God. He's reading it from 2012, and his subjectivized idea of contradictions, which is nothing but misunderstandings of how the language works. It doesn't follow an a priori law of exclusion. It doesn't follow any Gödelian law that says you can't, well, that's contradictory or anything like that. We know that as a fact, both from Gödel and quantum mechanics. They are complementary, necessary elements in a pure view, a pure, clear view. Atheism is really rare in India, and their Christianity is the most original. But it wouldn't follow the idea, the modern idea of Platonism. No, it takes in as much as it can from the outside, like a Kleinbachel, and thereby reinforcing its own stature, its own existence, its own strength, participating and having rules correlates in the real world. You need to stand on something. The real world is not made up of imaginatory physical objects. It's made of human doings, and those are always contradictory, having two directions. That's enforced needs that we become more bodily healthy. One, could we go to 158, please? And on the third paragraph, we have Alison A. Trites that changed the word martis using external a priori laws or ideas of laws. It means something else. So one word is meaning something else. And she gives the second rule from Lynn. Bachelor is an unmarried man, explanation. And martyrdom is then the idea of witness in the apocalypse. So it's no longer martyrs even, it's something else. And that is the idea that every language has an underlying grammar that can be exposed somehow explicitly. That makes for exclusion, not inclusion. Inclusion is to read the word as it is with a proper intonation or context in the ritual, and which has been transferred over the generations. This is just suggestions of practices, as Wittgenstein would say, life world, but single-handedly, subjectively referring to a particular new grammar for words that have been used for hundreds of years, thousands of years, has no ground in anything. It doesn't bear weight. Once more, it's the left hemisphere that try to explain explanation. I remember I had one logic teacher who said, can you explain the word why in one A4 page and leave it in on Friday? That was one of the exams. Or explain understanding, right? As a short B essay about what explaining is. Or tell me what is a question, and so forth. No, the Bible is whole. The contradictions that we see are of a rather new date, and they change over time. We'll be following a runaway horse, if you follow that sort of thinking. Kalle Lundahl, please enter.
Thank you, thank you.
More than welcome.
Let me see. Why is you remember this from the last time, perhaps?
Yeah, I remember Price.
So, Price 1984 monograph changed the paradigm. Now there was really no persecution. So in after, according to Kelhoffer's words, an abundance of secular literature on the cult's relevance for revelation has arisen. The most pertinent points for interpreting revelation in light of imperial cult are reviewed in this and following paragraph. And he doesn't say it explicitly, but there has been this notion that Christians did not suffer much. There was very little persecution.
That's good old Price.
Yes, that is the new paradigm. There was very little suffering. But we saw with the example from Antipas, who died, that this is not true. And let me see.
It's fascinating that the whole Bible should change in 1982.
And here, the word that we should notice is extraordinary. So only in this extraordinary instance, one Christian died. While the new paradigm says that the Romans were kind. The Christians did not suffer any persecutions. Almost none. Only in this particular case, extraordinary case, Antipas died. It seems remarkable. But suppose, for the sake of argument, that there were only Antipas who died. It's still one too much.
Yeah.
But I think. But let me go to something else. Excuse me. Yeah, this is interesting. I wish to credit John with crafting polemical double entendres. So here, Kelhoffer assumes that there are double entendres, that is ambiguities.
Oh yeah, I like that. Yeah.
I do agree with that, but that the problem is that Kelhoffer only assumes that when it suits him. You remember our discussion about the preposition dia. He says that it can only mean one thing. It can only mean because and out of. So only in this particular case does he allow double entendres. So he was capable of creating double entendres, but for instance, he was not able to create them. For instance, with the word martus, as you noticed.
Yes, exactly. And there is also one point where he lists different interpretation. Say this can be, and that wasn't. There was a cited person. I don't remember who that was. And he listed. You can have 4 interpretations. And as we know from the left hemisphere, this is how it gets away with ambiguity. It explicitly states the ambiguities. therefore to render them less like the duck rabbit and become explicit. So this word can have one of four following means is still in the left hemisphere, even more so.
No.
It's a trick of the left hemisphere to
And this is
linger
interesting
on.
also on page 157. Martyrs is not to be understood as the status of an elite martyr. Rather, John
Yeah,
also
like
martyrs
that.
upon there is example. But if he is going to work as an example, he should be really an elite martyr.
Yeah, definitely, of course.
So here there are no double entendres.
Well, I'll have to say all martyrs work that way. That's how they work. It doesn't need an explanation, but to add insult into injury, that's how a martyr works, like a saint.
Also here with the proposition para, he eliminates double entendre.
Oh, yeah.
So I think James Kelhoffer is very left side of the brain. Only
yeah. And they share
Vasik.
they share with the atheists 99.99%.
Oi. No, it cannot absolutely not mean witness. Oh, martyr, Jana.
Hello.
Does not. Let me see. And Jesus himself, he was not a martyr.
No.
Only a witness. Only a witness. For Jesus was only a witness. Let me see. Yes, this is his conclusion then. John does not use martyrs for him. It is of the martyr. Yes, there we have it.
Yeah.
Once for all. He was only a witness, so you know, Hans. If somebody
No,
tries
I know.
to... But let's...
It's a bit like explaining explanation, or Ian McGilchrist said, a schizophrenic needs explanations for words, and that is the most characteristic of a schizophrenic.
And this...
Like, you use words, you don't explain them.
And this Kelhoffer occupies the most important seat in theology in Scandinavia, that of Uppsala. So that's what...
It's very close. It's indiscernible actually from Dawkins and Daniel Dennett and the other famous guys. It's indiscernible. It's exactly the same thing. It's left hemisphere explaining the explanation. I think we need to end there. I have a stomach ache.
Yes,
I have a stomach ache, Kalle.
Oh no, sorry to hear.
No, because of this laughing. I feel empty. Thank you for excellent comments. Thank you for bringing this text in. And of course, we are not laughing against Kelhoffer. It's more of the tendencies of private language problems and the left hemisphere's take on the things. And we could say, to be generous, we are partly laughing at ourselves as well. I can admit to that. So it's not an excluding laughter. It's not the left hemisphere laughter. It's an including laughter. One need not to take oneself too serious or what one's doing, but to a certain extent, yes. I thank you very much, and thank you everyone for listening in. Have a very pleasant morning, day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye for now.
John does not use martyrs for him in the sense of martyr. John does not use martyrs in the sense of martyr. Oh yeah.
That we end with.